How long does it take to start a nuclear war? Russia's early warning protocol was clear. A missile is detected. Verification is made. The command chain is notified. The president decides. The retaliation order is given. The entire process had to be completed within minutes. Enemy missiles could arrive in 15 minutes. There were only a few minutes to decide. January 25, 1995. A rocket was launched from the Norwegian coast. Russian radars detected it at 9:24. At 9:28, the missile was matched with a Trident profile, potential nuclear threat. At 9:29, the alarm reached the Russian command chain. At 9:30, the nuclear briefcase was brought to Yeltsin. At 9:32, the missile changed its trajectory. It would fall into the sea. 4 minutes. 4 minutes from detection to decision. If Yeltsin had given the retaliation order during those 4 minutes, World War III would have begun. This is the story of the closest the world came to nuclear war after the Cold War ended. How a Norwegian science rocket nearly triggered Armageddon, and how 4 minutes separated humanity from destruction. By 1995, the world believed it was safe. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989. The Soviet Union had collapsed in 1991. The Cold War was over. Democracy had won. Nuclear war was a relic of the past. Russia and the United States were no longer enemies. They were partners. Presidents Clinton and Yeltsin met regularly. Arms reduction treaties were being negotiated. The threat of mutual annihilation seemed to have vanished. But the nuclear weapons had not vanished. Russia still possessed thousands of warheads. So did the United States. The missiles were still in their silos. The submarines still patrolled the oceans. The bombers still sat on runways ready to launch. And the early warning systems were still active. Radar stations across Russia still scanned the skies for incoming missiles. Satellites still watched for the telltale flash of rocket launches. The infrastructure of nuclear war remained intact. The Cold War mentality persisted too. Russian military doctrine still assumed that a surprise American attack was possible. Launch protocols still required rapid response. The finger remained on the trigger. Peace had been declared, but the machinery of destruction was still running. Andøya is a small island off the northern coast of Norway. Since 1962, it has hosted one of Europe's most important rocket research facilities. The Andøya Rocket Range launches sounding rockets, scientific instruments that study the upper atmosphere, the aurora borealis, and space weather. These rockets are not weapons. They carry scientific instruments, not explosives. They travel up into the atmosphere and then fall back to Earth, their data transmitted to researchers below. In January 1995, a team of Norwegian and American scientists prepared to launch a Black Brant 12 rocket. The mission was to study the northern lights, the aurora borealis that illuminates Arctic skies during winter. The Black Brant 12 was a 4-stage rocket capable of reaching altitudes of over 1,400 kilometers. It was the largest sounding rocket ever launched from Andøya. International protocols required Norway to notify other nations of rocket launches that might be detected by their radar systems. This was especially important for Russia, whose early warning radars covered the Norwegian Sea. Norway followed the protocols. They sent official notification through diplomatic channels. The launch date, trajectory, and purpose were all communicated to Moscow. The notification was sent. It arrived at the Russian Foreign Ministry, and then it disappeared. Bureaucracies fail in predictable ways. The Norwegian notification arrived at the Russian Foreign Ministry in early January. It was processed, filed, and forwarded. Somewhere in the chain of communication, it stopped. The military command that operated the early warning radars never received the notification. The officers monitoring Russian airspace had no idea that a rocket launch was planned from Norway. This was not sabotage. It was not conspiracy. It was simple bureaucratic failure. A document lost in the system, a message not passed along. The kind of mistake that happens in large organizations every day. Usually, such mistakes have minor consequences. A delayed report, a missed meeting, an unanswered email. This time, the consequence was nearly nuclear war. On the morning of January 25th, the scientists at Andoya completed their preparations. Weather conditions were favorable. All systems were functioning normally. At 7:24 local time, the Black Brant 12 rocket lifted off from its launch pad. The rocket climbed rapidly, its 4 stages igniting in sequence. Within minutes, it was traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour, soaring into the upper Rhone atmosphere toward its peak altitude. And Russian radars were watching. The Olenegorsk radar station sits on the Kola Peninsula, Russia's northwestern corner. It is one of the most important nodes in Russia's early warning network. Its powerful radars scan the skies over the Norwegian Sea, the Barents Sea, and the North Atlantic. This is the direction from which an American submarine-launched missile attack would come. At 9:24 Moscow time, the radar operators at Olenegorsk detected an object rising from the Norwegian coast. The radar signature was alarming. The object was large. It was traveling fast. Its trajectory was heading toward Russian territory. The operators ran the signature through their identification systems. The profile matched a Trident missile, the American submarine-launched ballistic missile that could carry multiple nuclear warheads. Trident missiles were launched from submarines in the Norwegian Sea. They could reach Moscow in 15 minutes. They were the most feared weapons in the American arsenal. The operators followed protocol. They reported the detection to higher command. The clock started ticking. The report moved up the chain of command with terrifying speed. Within minutes, the detection reached the Russian Strategic Rocket Forces Command Center. Officers examined the data, the trajectory, the speed, the radar signature. Everything was consistent with a ballistic missile attack. But something was strange. Only one missile had been detected. An American first strike would involve hundreds of missiles launched simultaneously. One missile made no sense, unless it was an electromagnetic pulse attack. Military planners had long theorized about EMP weapons. A single nuclear warhead detonated at high altitude could generate an electromagnetic pulse that would destroy electronics across a vast area. Russian command and control systems could be disabled. Radar stations could be blinded. A follow-up attack would then be unstoppable. One missile might be the precursor to total war. The Russian military went to high alert. Strategic forces were notified. Bomber crews were alerted. Submarine commanders received warnings, and someone made the decision to inform the president. At 9:30 Moscow time, Boris Yeltsin was presented with the Cheget. The Cheget is Russia's nuclear briefcase. It is the Russian equivalent of the American football, the device that allows the president to authorize nuclear strikes. Inside are the codes and communication equipment needed to order a retaliatory attack. The Cheget accompanies the Russian president at all times. It is carried by a military officer who never leaves the president's side. It is the physical manifestation of nuclear command authority. On the morning of January 25th, the briefcase was opened in front of Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin was shown the radar data. A missile had been detected. It appeared to be a Trident. It was heading toward Russia. He had minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike. This was the moment the entire Cold War nuclear infrastructure had been built for. Rapid detection, rapid notification, rapid decision. The assumption was that in a real attack, there would be no time for extended deliberation. The president would have to act on incomplete information under extreme time pressure. Yeltsin faced that scenario now. The radar showed a missile. His military advisors were telling him it might be an attack. The Cheget was open. The codes were ready. The fate of hundreds of millions of people hung on his decision. What was Yeltsin thinking in those minutes? Later accounts suggest he remained calm. He asked questions. He demanded more information. He did not panic. The single missile anomaly troubled him. Why would the Americans launch just one missile? It made no strategic sense. A real attack would be overwhelming. One missile suggested something else was happening. But the clock was ticking. If this was an attack, every second of delay reduced Russia's ability to respond. The military doctrine called for launch on warning. Retaliate before the enemy missiles arrive. Waiting too long meant losing the ability to strike back. Yeltsin waited. At 9:32, new data arrived. The missile's trajectory had shifted. It was no longer heading toward Moscow or any Russian target. It was arcing away toward the open sea. The tension in the room eased slightly, but uncertainty remained. Was this a malfunction? A course correction? The beginning of a larger pattern? More seconds passed. More data came in. The object was descending. It was going to fall into the sea. At approximately 9:34, the all-clear was given. The object was not a threat. It was not heading toward Russia. The alert was canceled. Yeltsin closed the Cheget. The world had just survived its closest brush with nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The missile was the Black-Brant 12 research rocket. It had followed its planned trajectory perfectly. It had climbed to its maximum altitude, released its scientific instruments, and descended into the Norwegian Sea as intended. From the perspective of the Norwegian scientists, the launch had been routine. A successful mission, good data collected, nothing unusual. From the perspective of Russian radar operators, it had looked like a nuclear attack. The Black-Brant 12 shared characteristics with ballistic missiles. It was large. It was fast. It rose from a location where American submarines operated. Its initial trajectory pointed toward Russia. The radar systems could not distinguish between a scientific rocket and a weapon. They saw a threat and reported a threat. The failure was not technological. The radars worked exactly as designed. The failure was human and bureaucratic. The warning that would have explained everything never reached the people who needed to see it. Norway had done everything right. Russia's military had done everything right according to their protocols. But a lost piece of paper nearly ended civilization. The incident remained secret for years. Neither Russia nor Norway had any interest in publicizing how close the world had come to disaster. The story emerged gradually through leaks and later official acknowledgments. When the truth became known, it sparked international concern. If a routine scientific rocket could trigger a nuclear alert in 1995, what else might cause a false alarm? What other bureaucratic failures might be waiting to happen? The incident led to improved communication protocols between Russia and Western nations. Hotlines were established. Notification procedures were strengthened. Military-to-military contacts increased. But the fundamental problem remained. Nuclear weapons existed in enormous numbers. Early warning systems could be fooled. Human beings could make mistakes. The machinery of destruction was still ready to operate. Russia's military infrastructure had degraded significantly since the Soviet collapse. Radar coverage had gaps. Satellites were not being replaced. The systems designed to prevent false alarms were deteriorating. This made the situation more dangerous, not less. A weaker early warning system meant more uncertainty. More uncertainty meant more pressure to act quickly. And acting quickly on incomplete information was exactly what had nearly caused disaster. The Norwegian rocket incident was not unique. Throughout the nuclear age, false alarms have brought the world to the brink of war. The technology designed to prevent surprise attacks has repeatedly generated false warnings of attacks that were not happening. In 1979, a training tape was accidentally loaded into American early warning computers. The screens showed a massive Soviet attack underway. Nuclear bombers were scrambled before the error was discovered. In 1980, a failed computer chip caused American systems to report Soviet missile launches. 3 times in 3 days, false alarms triggered alerts. Each time, officers had to determine within minutes that no attack was actually occurring. In 1983, Soviet satellites detected what appeared to be American missile launches. Officer Stanislav Petrov judged it to be a false alarm and did not report it as a genuine attack. He was right. The satellites had been fooled by sunlight reflecting off clouds. The pattern is clear. Complex systems fail. Human operators make mistakes. Communication breaks down. And every failure carries the risk of triggering a nuclear response. The world has survived these incidents through a combination of good judgment and good luck. Petrov used his judgment. Yeltsin used his judgment. But judgment can fail too. What does the Norwegian rocket incident teach us? First, that nuclear danger did not end with the Cold War. The weapons remain. The delivery systems remain. The early warning systems remain. The possibility of catastrophic error remains. Second, that small failures can have enormous consequences. A lost document, a miscommunication, a bureaucratic oversight. These mundane problems nearly triggered nuclear war. Third, that time pressure is the enemy of good decisions. The protocols that demanded rapid response almost caused disaster. Yeltsin's willingness to wait, to ask questions, to resist the pressure to act immediately may have saved the world. Fourth, that luck has played a larger role in human survival than we like to admit. We have come close to nuclear war many times. Each time, something prevented catastrophe. A thoughtful officer. A malfunctioning system that failed in the right direction. Pure chance. January 25, 1995 should be remembered. A Norwegian research rocket. A lost notification. 4 minutes of uncertainty. A president with his finger on the nuclear button. 4 years after the Cold War ended, the world nearly ended with it. The missiles are still there. The submarines still patrol. The briefcases still follow the presidents. And somewhere, right now, a radar is scanning the sky, looking for missiles, looking for threats, ready to start the countdown that leads to the question no human should ever have to answer. 4 minutes. That is all that separates peace from annihilation. 4 minutes is not enough time. It never was. It never will be. Until the weapons are gone, we live on borrowed time. The clock is still ticking.